The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
Hello and welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. I'm Josh Edison, he is Dr. M. Dentith. We're both sitting here in Auckland, New Zealand, but for how long?
Not for much longer, because soon I'll be standing up and I'll be standing in Auckland, New Zealand. But also going to the US.
Yes, and a couple of days after that. I will still be in Auckland.
Alone. So alone.
So alone. Literally the only person in Auckland.
Yes, Auckland only has a population of 2 people.
After the purges.
And what purges they were.
I do like a good purge, but...
Dietary fibre and everything.
The salient point, though, is that the good Dr. Dentith shall be overseas for a couple of weeks.
In sunny California and then less sunny, more cold Boise, Idaho.
So we can possibly expect maybe an interview or something? Or
Will
will you save it up for when you get home?
No, I'm hoping to record a few pieces whilst I'm there and broadcast them from the internet.
Ooh la la.
I know, it's modern, it's exciting, and it's very frightening. You wouldn't believe the stuff they have on the internet. You would not believe it.
Cats.
And this thing called Rickets?
Reddit?
No,
that's what a frog says.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That doesn't sound right at all.
Anyway,
it's an anniversary.
It is. It's an anniversary. Not of us, not of the podcast. Today, as we are recording, it's the 22nd of November.
In the US.
Is it? It's the 22nd of November. No, it's 23rd of November here. Yes.
Yeah.
I was going my one day backwards instead of one day forwards and what have you. I can't... There's time, Matthew.
It's immaterial lunchtime doubly so. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Yes. Thank you.
No, it is the 22nd in the States as we speak, which means
we're pretending it is, because frankly...
Well, yeah, you're going to be listening to this any time.
And you also don't know what date we're recording this on. It's not as if we hold up a newspaper to prove...
No. I mean, I could hold my tablet up right close to the camera so you could see the little date in the corner, but I could have set that to anything, so who knows. Yeah. The point is, 22nd of November is the anniversary of the assassination of JFK, one of the big all-time conspiracy theory generators. So we're not going to talk about it today.
No. In fact, I'd be more inclined to talk about the fact that it's 23rd of November in New Zealand, which means it's actually the anniversary of Doctor Who, because that first broadcast, the 23rd of November 1963, a day after Kennedy died. Coincidence?
Yes.
Yes, quite definitely a coincidence.
Anyway, we figured we can't not mention that fact, but we've covered the JFK assassination twice now, I think.
More times than he's died, anyway, allegedly.
So yes, we have other things to talk about. I think this episode... also, I think, brings to a close our little series on historical false flag conspiracy theories.
For the time being.
We've come to the end of our list, and I think that's probably enough for now. So we've got one more to go out on. But before we do that, I suppose we should get a little bit of news up here.
Indeed. Let's get a little bit of news up me.
Yes.
Breaking conspiracy theories in the news.
So, many moons ago, we talked about the mysterious case of America's first and still unsolved earjacking, the case of D.B. Cooper. Now, information has come to light which suggests the infamous Dan Cooper, misnomered as D.B., not only survived his parachute jump, but the FBI covered up that fact.
The evidence is an FBI memo about a letter that purports to be from Cooper, and which was sent to the FBI and various news organisations 17 days after the hijacking. The letter contains within it some facts that at the time had never been leaked to the public, such as there being no usable fingerprints found at the scene of the crime.
The typewritten letter was analysed by boffins at the FBI, and they found that the handwriting on the envelope was very similar to that of Cooper's boarding card. It's this bit of startling evidence which suggests that the FBI took the letter and its contents seriously.
The interesting part of this story is the fact that the FBI, when they released the information as part of a trove of OAA documents, redacted the reference to Cooper's name, making it look as if they were covering up an embarrassing secret.
Could it be that the FBI knew either that Cooper survived his parachute jump, or even worse, found out who Cooper was but were never able to get him for his crime, and thus covered it up? certainly possible, and this new information does look pretty suspicious, especially now the case is officially closed. It's almost as if there are certain questions they do not want us to ask.
Now, talking about awkward questions, did we really land on the moon?
We did, yes.
But did we?
Yes.
Well, prepare to potentially eat your hat. You're not actually wearing a hat here. Have this one. I have already prepared.
Prop comedy.
Okay, so a YouTuber by the name of StreetCap1 has analysed an image from the Apollo 17 landing which definitely shows reflected in the visor of one of the astronauts on the lunar surface a long-haired man with no helmet wearing a waistcoat.
Does it, though?
Well, maybe not.
Maybe not.
Okay, as far as I can tell, it shows someone standing in the distance, but whether they're wearing the costume of a dandy or full astronautic gear, I cannot say. Frankly, it's a blurry mess, and zooming in on a JPEG version of the image does not help matters.
So I'm not eating this hat?
No, give it back.
Also, even if this image turned out to be the real deal, it wouldn't actually tell us that earlier missions were fake, would it?
No, at best it would show that one mission was fake, or that between the Apollo 11 and Apollo 17 landings, the USA created a colony of hard, space-worthy dandies, a secret NASA is not willing to reveal to the world.
Yeah, the early 70s were a frightening time. Dandies on the moon is just the tip of that decadent decades iceberg.
Finally, some news about a clandestine organisation which comes from the UK rather than America. It's time to ask MI6 to show me the money.
Yes, this is an interesting little story. It turns out in the 1940s, MI6 feared that the UK government would cut its funding, as it had done after the First World War, and so started a secret slush fund in order to ensure that they could remain operational and also fund activities that maybe Whitehall would not explicitly agree to.
Now, the orchestrator of this deceptive slush fund was Stuart Menzies, aka C, aka the chief of MI6. Menzies managed to back, in today's money, bank about £38 million sterling, just over 50 million US dollars, which came from a variety of sources, including an unnamed American donor.
The American angle, the American angle here is fascinating.
Actually, that would be a great name for a superhero.
The Americal.
Yeah, the American angle. Hi, I'm American angle.
No.
No?
It sounded good at first. No, I'm not buying it
What
anymore.
about Angela Merkel's angle?
Angela Merkel by herself could be a superhero. Teutonically efficient.
She does need superpowers
she has a
to form a
Terminator
new
quality too.
coalition in Germany. That's not working out for them at the moment at all. Jamaica? No, she couldn't.
Yes. Anyway, the American angle here is fascinating. At the time, it wasn't clear that the US was going to continue having an overseas intelligence service. So certain Americans were keen to get the British on side to do their dirty work for them. And dirty work they did. The slush fund allowed MI6 to recover from disastrous endeavours like their attempt to overthrow the Egyptian regime and the like.
The fund was eventually revealed to the UK Treasury by C in 1952. Technically at that point, the money did become the government's to allocate, but it is clear that for several years afterwards, it was still largely MI6's to control and use as they please.
MI6 now claims such a thing would never happen now.
They would though, wouldn't they?
I couldn't possibly comment.
And that is all the news that is fit to spit.
Righto, well that's the news. So into our final false flag, or is it?
Dun dun dun. Actually, I think we'll probably have a bit of a debate about this at the end.
Well, yeah, exactly.
It's kind of hard to know.
Much like the USS Liberty incident that we talked about last week, which had some false flaggy elements to it, but didn't really seem to qualify as an actual false flag attack. This one, yeah,
it's more of a false flag than the USS Liberty is, obviously, from the face of it. But whether it's a false flag, or just a false flag, or just a flag, I don't know. Is it? Maybe it's just a flag.
It's not. No, it's the murder of tens of thousands of people.
Oh,
so it's more than just a flag.
I've been reading entirely the wrong notes. Hold on.
Okay, you scroll down. No, what we're talking about now. It involves a word in a language that I'm not too much of an expert in, but if the phonetic guideline was correct and I've read it properly, it's Katynia. The Katyn Massacre is what we're talking about today. Katynia being a forest, I think, in particular, which is it's in Russia near Poland. Was it in Poland near Russia? I'm pretty sure it was in Russia near Poland.
I have a feeling at the time that this incident occurred...
This is during World War II, so things were probably a little bit fluid anyway.
Yeah.
It's a forest where the largest of the mass graves of this incident were found. We are talking about, once again, World War II, and the massacre of around 22,000 Polish nationals.
22,000.
22 actual thousand, 3 zeros, which was carried out by the NKVD. Now, this stands for words in Russian that I do not think I can pronounce. Narodny Commissariat. No, I don't. I'm not going to attempt.
Del.
Yep, it translates to the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, and they're basically a Soviet secret police organisation. So the background, as I understand it, is that this is near the start of the war, back when Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia were still buddy-buddy. The Soviets went into Poland while they were still on Germany's side, essentially, rounded up a whole lot of Polish people, shipped them off to prison camps, and then eventually executed a hell of a lot of them. It's been suggested that they just did this so that after the war, Poland wouldn't be able to marshal a decent-sized army, and I believe because Poland was a country where sort of everyone was conscripted, so the soldiers contained a lot of sort of educated upper-class people as well, not just not just the
peasants.
The peasants, yes.
The lower classes.
I'm trying to say, I mean, the nice way of saying it, but yeah.
That you can wipe out a decent part of the Polish population, both in the lower, the middle, and the upper class, just by executing everyone you find.
Yeah, and so the idea being that once World War II winds up, they won't have to worry about any sort of a threat from Poland because they'll already have taken out a significant chunk of their potential army. So we know it was the Russians now, but here's where things get a little bit murky. So during the war, people started asking, "Hey, Soviet Russia,
what happened to all those Poles?
Yeah, all those Polish prisoners you had. What happened to them?"
And Russia's response was, "Oh, we lost track of them.
Yeah, we set them free. Yeah, they went their own way.
They wandered off. They didn't leave any notes.
Yeah, we don't know.
Just
have no idea. Sorry." And then the mass graves started turning up.
Yes, now it's important to note, so the mass graves turn up after Russia and Nazi Germany stop being friends.
Yes.
The Nazis move into this particular disputed part of the Polish-Russian border.
Start hearing stories,
and they discover a mass grave of 5,000 Polish nationals. And the Nazis, being dutiful, and that's a weird sentence to say at the best of times, go, this grave is a wee bit weird. We're going to launch an investigation. And so they do an investigation, and their conclusion is, these are the missing Poles that Russia claims not to know where they've gone. And it's quite evident that the Russian army massacred these people and then buried the bodies. So the Nazis released basically a press release during the war saying, "We've discovered a mass grave of Polish nationals killed by the Russians." And then Russian goes, nah, wasn't us, bro. It was you. You committed those murders.
Almost literally what they said. Yeah, and it started to become sort of a propaganda war. It sort of suggested that the reason why the Nazis investigated these mass killings so thoroughly was because they really wanted to be sure that they could pin it on the Soviets.
Yeah.
As a sort of propaganda victory, and Russia basically turned around and said right back at you. Russia said, no, this is the Nazis trying to frame us. They are the ones who killed all these prisoners. They claimed they were prisoners of war who the Nazis had been using as slave labour for some construction project, and then killed them all once they were no longer needed.
And of course what happens there is that because the Russians are now on the side of the Allied forces, at least nominally, so the UK and the US, went, we believe Russia. Nazis are, after all, the bad guys. So Russia's word will be taken on trust on this matter. It probably was the Nazis.
So,
Now, whether the UK and the US believed that is another matter entirely.
do not believe they did.
No, but ostensibly, and as we'll get to at the end of the episode, they allowed the Russians to maintain the fiction that the Nazis committed the murder. This is a weird episode. We're going to end up defending Nazis.
We are almost defending the Nazis at this point, yeah.
This is what Trump's America has done to us. We are now defending Nazis on this podcast against Russia.
No, so yeah, everything then becomes this propaganda war. Everything becomes very cover-uppy. The Russians were, destroying any evidence that they were behind these massacres. They were interviewing witnesses, essentially making sure they towed the party line and didn't say anything that might incriminate Russia. They commissioned an extraordinary state commission. And this particular one was called the Extraordinary State Commission for Ascertaining and Investigating Crimes Perpetrated by the German Fascist Invaders. So it's
kind
not
of
like
puts the conclusion in the commission.
Yes, so it's not like there was ever any doubt as to what they were going to find. It was just how they were going to find it. And yes, sort of talk about this had got back to Churchill in the UK and who was it, Roosevelt in the States. And they had seen this evidence that no, actually the Russians were behind this. I believe there's evidence that suggests that they did find this evidence credible, but Russia was an ally, and sort of the pragmatics of the situation were like, we need to preserve the alliance, so we better side with our ally against the Nazis, because damn it, it's the middle of World War II.
Yes, and we kind of need the Russian war machine to win this war. The last thing we want is fickle old Russia going back to its Nazi chums.
And then things got extra wacky once the war was over and the Nuremberg trials started.
Wait, first of all, let's actually do the trials that occurred in Russia. So, between 1945 and January 1946, 7 Wehrmacht servicemen who had been captured by the Russians during the war were tried by a Soviet military court in Leningrad. Now, one of the alleged perpetrators, Arno Jure, was charged with murdering numerous civilians using machine guns in Soviet villages, and he even confessed to burying Polish nationals, although he didn't actually admit to executing them. But later on, he recanted his confession, claiming it had been forced. Which, of course, Russia just went, well, of course he would say that. He doesn't want to take responsibility for what he did. But, of course, actually, it was a forced confession because he didn't actually do it.
So we now know definitely that these are very much show trials.
But now we move on to
Nuremberg. So,
because, of course, this evidence, even though the Russians had tried and shown that Wehrmacht soldiers were responsible, Russia didn't use that evidence at all when it came to Nuremberg.
No, so in setting up the Nuremberg trials, the Soviet negotiators requested that certain German soldiers be prosecuted for the Katyn Massacre. The US and UK negotiators agreed, but apparently they were a little bit embarrassed by the whole affair, that they had to include these things, which, if not they, then at least the higher-ups knew that were probably bullshit. So they basically said, yes, we can include these charges in the trials, but it's up to you guys to prove them, okay? We're not going to have anything to do with it. We'll just allow you to...
we will allow you to put the charges forward in front of the tribunal, and then if you've got evidence to support your case, we will certainly look into prosecuting these soldiers, or Nazi Germany in total. And the Soviets kind of failed to present any evidence that the Nazis were in fact responsible. Once again, defending Nazis. I really am not happy with myself.
No. So then, so that's basically how it stayed at the time. Officially, on paper, Nazi Germany was responsible for the Katyn Massacre. The Soviets had cleared their name for the time being, but it didn't stay that way.
No, so during the 1950s, the head of the KGB, Alexander Shelepin, actually ended up destroying many of the documents relating to the massacre in order to kind of minimize the chance the truth would be revealed, that i.e. Stalin had actually ordered the massacre in the first place. But he made a kind of mistake, because he wrote a note to Khrushchev in 1959 about the execution of actually in this case, 21,857 Poles.
Official count.
And the proposal to destroy their personal files, and that note was something he failed to destroy. And eventually, Soviet scholars in the late 80s discovered this note, and indeed showed that Stalin had in fact ordered the massacre, which kind of forced the Russian government at the time, which of course was going through a great period of change. I believe they call it perestroika.
They do, I assume.
Kalashnikov.
No?
I don't know.
I don't know. You've come over all Russian suddenly, Matthew. I don't quite know what's happening.
They call me Boris Yeltsin.
Yes. No, they don't. No, but actually, this is we've kind of heard this story before, because when we talked about the Sverdlovsk leak a little while ago, that was another thing that around this time Boris Yeltsin fessed up to. So there was a little bit of a program of that, wasn't it?
He's quite into fessing up to things.
Yeah,
Boris
sort of
Yeltsin.
Destroying ties with the past by acknowledging the crimes that the previous regime had been responsible, or earlier regimes had been responsible for. So yeah, so Yeltsin released these top secret documents that showed, yes, indeed, the Soviets were responsible for this massacre. There's still a bit of political. A bit of politics around it, though, because while they acknowledged that the Soviets were responsible for the massacre, they refused to refer to them as war crimes or indeed genocide, which is what the Polish government would like them to be acknowledged as.
Yes, there's
so
been
I believe
a
that's still
little
in
bit
dispute
of issue between Poland and Russia on this. It's also important to note that the Communist Party of the Russian Federation continue to deny that Stalin ordered the massacre, and they claim to this day that all of the documents which show that he did are in fact fakes, and the Nazis were in fact always responsible for the massacre, as Stalin had always said.
So it's a funny one, and I guess maybe now might be a good time to ask, is it really a false flag, though? Because, like, the sort of the prototypical idea of a false flag is one party pretends to be another party so they can carry out an attack. If you believe 9/11 Truth or Conspiracy Theories, the US government pretends, has agents pretending to be Al-Qaeda to carry out those attacks and so on. Here we've got a case where this incident was basically done in secret, and then when it was discovered...
In coalition, technically, with the party that's now being blamed.
And then when it's found out later, then they try to claim it was done by some, so it's passing the blame after the fact.
So you're saying this is not a false flag, but more a disinformation campaign.
Yeah, and I mean, it seemed... we haven't mentioned the Goebbels quote yet, which is quite a good one. It was very much a case of this propaganda war where both sides kind of knew what the deal was. There's a quote from the diary of Joseph Goebbels from the 29th of September 1943.
Because we've been supporting Nazis, you can do the most ridiculous German accent whilst reading this out, because
I don't know.
Frankly, Goebbels deserves to be derided at this particular point in time.
If I could do a good Alan Rickman from Die Hard, I would, but I don't think I can. But it is a modern German accent, which is a little bit sort of effete perhaps now, the very sort of Euro...
Well, actually, this is one of the situations where we should have watched the L.S. Smith and Jones sketch about the different types of Nazis who appear in sketches.
That is my favourite L.S. Smith and Jones sketch.
Yes, if you're ever going to watch a bit of British sketch comedy from the 80s and early 90s, the L.S. Smith and Jones German General sketch, which you can find on YouTube, is a brilliant bit of comedy that kind of shows up the cliches of German officers in war films.
So, in my best cliche German Nazi general accent, Goebbels wrote, in German, I assume, this is Translated into English. Unfortunately, we have had to give up Katyn. The Bolsheviks undoubtedly will soon find that we shot 12,000 Polish officers. That episode is one that is going to cause us quite a little trouble in the future. The Soviets are undoubtedly going to make it their business to discover as many mass graves as possible and then blame it on us. So basically, he knew what the Russians were going to do. He figured, we found out the Russians did it, but he knew sure as eggs that the Russians were going to try and flip it on them and blame them for it.
Yes, because the Russians weren't going to go, yeah, the people that we're allied with, we went round massacring a few years ago. Oops, sorry about that.
Daisy. Yes.
Whilst when there's a obvious enemy, you can blame it upon. See, so I mean, this actually looks like a disinformation campaign.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like a false flag. I mean, you can see why, in retrospect, if you're unclear about the timeline, you might go, well, these bodies were found, and it was obviously a plant by the Russian government to blame the Nazis. That would make for a delightful false flag. But in this particular case, it was the Nazis who discovered the bodies and then made their report, and Russia went, no, disinformation time. I mean, we've already invented disinformation in 1936. We've got to use the idea again. We'll just tell people that the Nazis did it because nobody likes the Nazis.
Who are you going to believe, me or the Nazis?
Yeah. And it's quite obvious you believe the non-Nazi.
Yes, so it's all just it's politics, but I wouldn't call it a false flag.
No, and I think this and the USS Liberty incident are great examples of things which, on a really low level gloss, they look like false flags, but as soon as you actually inspect the evidence, they're actually much more interesting claims of conspiracy. It's not to say that false flags are uninteresting claims of conspiracy, but these aren't simple false flags. They're complex conspiratorial tales that might look initially like false flags if you're not particularly historically literate.
No, so I mean, had the Russians dressed up as Germans and executed these Polish people in view of witnesses, then yes, they would come. But as it was, I mean, 22,000 people, supposedly, they were literally executing people from dawn till dusk for days. That's a hell of a lot of people to kill. So they were doing it far from the prying eyes of anyone else, so they could do it in secret. But to actually engineer something like that as a false flag event doesn't even really sound possible in the first place.
It would require a lot of work. Although Russia does have past form.
Yes, I suppose if anyone could, they could. But so if we're nearly at the end of the episode, and we are at the end for now of our series on false flags. So are there any sort of general morals we can come up with?
Never cook a fried egg upside down.
That's a good idea. What counts as upside down? You mean when you're upside down, or when the egg's upside down? Or when the pan's upside down?
See? 3 options.
Right.
None of which
so asking for trouble anyway, yes.
Well, I suppose if you're getting for moral about false flags, it's that even though not every alleged false flag we looked at in our short series turns out to be an actual false flag, there are still more false flags than most people give credit for. Because normally the reaction to that's a false flag is going, well, that's ridiculous. Give me one example of an actual false flag event. And it turns out there are several false flag events, and probably a lot more than several, over the course of the 20th century. And so it is the case that governments, from time to time, and possibly more often than just from time to time, do something and then blame a foreign power for it because they know they're going to get away with it due to the outrage caused, etc., etc. So the moral is false flags are more common than you might think. Apart from you, who's going, no, I already thought that. Good job, yo.
Yes. So I mean, we've seen, we've looked at false flags that were successfully perpetrated. We've looked at false flags that got found out pretty much straight away. We've looked at ones that managed to stay secret for many, many decades until the government responsible essentially fessed up because it was so far in the past that it wouldn't harm them to do so. They can happen. That isn't to say, though, of course, that your particular pet false flag theory is in any way valid, because, as we always say, it just comes down to the evidence.
Yeah.
You have to evaluate each one individually.
Which we've been doing for the last few weeks, with a few detours into Dan Brown and other related materials.
So, I believe we are done.
We are done, and taking, for Josh at least, a 2-week hiatus. What are you going to do in your 2 weeks off, Josh?
Well, next week I have jury duty, as things worked out. Which you had jury duty over the course of this podcast.
I did. It was
a year or
very
two
boring.
ago. Yeah, well, that's what I'm led to believe. Who knows? Maybe I'll get picked for an interesting trial. But from what I'm here, the experience is mostly sitting in a chair for 2 hours and then being told, no, we don't need you today, go home, and then coming back and doing it the next day.
Yeah, ad nauseum.
Yep. Well, we'll see. Who knows? If it's anything particularly juicy, I probably won't be allowed to tell you about it.
It's true.
But we live in hope. So, before Matthew zooms off to the States and then zooms back again and then sits in this very chair, I assume.
Who knows? Maybe we might mix things
Who
up.
knows? Next time you see us, I could be sitting all the way over there and he could be sitting here. The world will have gone topsy-turvy.
It's true. I am going to the Northern Hemisphere. Things are upside down
Might
there.
come back with all sorts of weird habits and preconceptions.
A new habit. I haven't bought a habit in quite some time.
So until things resume their normal routine, you are listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, or you are watching the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. Is that what you're
And
about
not
to say?
listening to it at the same time because you like to read lips.
Oh, we talked about the other week that we should run the Google's automatic subtitle generation.
Yes, and then as a special episode, maybe reenact that script.
Oh, that's something for me to do during the break.
Yeah.
I meant to do that last week and I totally forgot. If you want to watch the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, wacky subtitles or not, you could do so on YouTube. Just search for the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, probably the easiest way to find it. If you prefer to listen to it in the traditional podcasting milieu, is that the correct word? Probably not, but it sounded exotic.
Yeah.
iTunes is your man, Stitch is your woman, Podbean's your gender non-binary individual. There's a few different places you can find it, but your podbean.com, of course, is where it's officially hosted, conspiracism.podbean.com.
And there you'll find information about our Patreon system, which sometimes people use. And if more people used it, we would buy new resources.
I guess.
I actually quite like the idea of some kind of auto cue thing.
Yeah. I don't know, we could... the old tablet arrangement, not too bad, but yeah, maybe if we had some... Maybe then we could actually perform glove puppetry or be more animated in our gesturing or something like that.
It's true, we could just gesticulate a lot more if we had an auto cue, just saying.
And I think that's everything.
It is, basically.
Yep. So, until everything... Well, actually, not until everything goes back to normal, because presumably while Matthew's overseas, as we've suggested, you may receive an update or two.
There might be content.
But probably not from me, at least, for the next couple of weeks. So from me, and possibly from him... Oh, no, wait a minute. Who is me? Who is him? We haven't done that bit of things.
Dentith, Conspiracism... HO Ransom, Episto.org. You've heard this all before.
Josh Edison, Monkey Fluids on Twitter. Now we've done everything, and now we can say goodbye.
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 You've been listening to Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, hosted by Josh Edison and Dentith. If you'd like to help support us, please find details of our pledge drive at either Patreon or Podbean. If you'd like to get in contact with us, email us at podcastconspiracy@gmail.com.